If you use the internet on a daily basis, and chances are you do, you probably don't put much thought into cybersecurity. You know, your network connections, the pages you visit, the files you download. You should be thinking about these all the time. Welcome to And Security for All. Your host is Kim Hakim. We're here to help you understand, in general terms, how and why your cybersecurity should be kept in check. Now, here is Kim Hakim.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of And Security for All. I'm Kim Hakim, your host. I hope everyone's ready for another weekend. As you all know, I'm in the Midwest, and we're actually going to have some nice weather in the 70s this weekend. So time to get outside again here in the Midwest. Excited about that. As many of you know, I am also the CEO of FutureCon Events. We put on cybersecurity conferences all throughout North America. I was out in Los Angeles last week for another in-person event. It was so great. It was packed. It's so nice seeing people again. Next week, we are off to Minneapolis. So if you're in the Minneapolis region and you would like to join a great show, we have an awesome lineup of speakers from Freddie Mac, Sleep Number, Cummins, SureScripts, and many, many more. If you'd like to attend, check out the event on our website at FutureCon Events. You can DM me and I will get you a free pass to that event. A big shout out to my guest host last week, Jonathan Kimmett, who is the CISO at the University of Tulsa. He had a guest on, Andrew Lemon, who's a principal security engineer at Alias, and they were talking about the mind of a pen tester. It was such a great show. I was highly intrigued, and I highly recommend you guys go check out that episode. It was really good. You could go to Voice America, and you can go to the Business Network and look for And Security for All, and you can catch all of our past shows. So we are definitely finding ourselves in a very unique times. Today, we're going to talk about everything that's happening right now, the risk and the cyber threats from Russia, talking about government and intelligence agencies from all around the world. Of course, this is all stemming from the escalation of Russia's invasion on Ukraine, and our hearts totally go out to all the Ukrainians for their peace and their safety. We have always discussed on the show the risk of nation state attackers. Today, I have two experts that I'm excited to get their insight on. Are we ready? Are we prepared for these nation state attacks? We're hearing about them on the news. How do we brace up? What are we doing for these new wave of attacks that we're expecting? I met my guests today. I have two guests. I met them at the FutureCon cybersecurity event in Dallas, and I have the perfect mix of their expertise. I have Randy Potts, who is the CISO and an information security leader at Real Time Resolutions, and I have Pat Benoit. He's the VP of Global Cyber Conference Risk Compliance Business. He's a Business Information Security Officer at CBRE. So I am excited for my guests. So welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Hey,
thank you. So we have a lot to talk about in a very short time. And it's so interesting because I feel like everybody has a different point of view on what's going on right now. So I think that let's just start off and dive in, and let's just take a couple minutes to get both of your insights on your opinions of what's going on and what do you think we're going to start seeing as a fallout of what's going on in the country right now? And we can start with, how about you, Pat?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, there's really two different perspectives from my point of view with respect to the cybersecurity positioning in most of the companies. There are some companies who have taken the approach that attackers are attackers, exploits are exploits, and we're going to do everything we can to, mitigate those kinds of avenues of attack, no matter where they're coming from. The other side is there are a lot of companies out there who maybe have not graduated beyond a lot of the perimeter security mindset, and so they're not looking at things like zero trust type strategies and enhanced identity access management programs to try and help with these things a little more. Biggest condition, in my opinion, is that, you know, when you look at some of the statistics, it shows. I think the last one I saw was like over 90% of alerts that are received have something to do with some kind of cyber nation state cyber attack. And it's because they're not just going after other nation states from an espionage only point of view. They're going after the non-governmental and infrastructure targets to try and disrupt or gather intelligence or just in some cases maybe destroy. And so that's a lot of time and effort and money that these nation states are spending on trying to get to our information.
So, Randy, what about you? What's your input on what's going on and what we might expect to see? It could be we might be seeing something right now while we're on the show. It seems like every time we turn the news on, there's a different story.
No, absolutely. I think, whenever I think of nation states, I really think about someone who's got a lot of resources to put in this. If you think about your typical ransomware gang or, the people who are out there developing malware, it's almost a business model for them. So they need to essentially be able to turn a profit. So they're going to be a little bit more efficient in the way they develop exploits, whereas the nation states are definitely going to be more complicated. And so really what you need to do is, make sure you have really good hygiene out of the gate. Make sure you install those patches, make sure you've got your endpoint security software everywhere it needs to be. And then, like Pat was just mentioning there around identity management, because that's going to be the next step is trying to get credentials. And so, put multi-factor everywhere you can. If you can get to that sort of zero trust type of model, get there. Because what you'll see is even if you're not targeted as a part of infrastructure, something, specifically targeting you, you could very easily be part of collateral damage where there's a piece of malware that just kind of gets out of control. And maybe it jumps from one network to the other. Another thing to think about is how you would operate if some of that infrastructure was taken down. When I think about things like warehouses that have old systems in them, they're very susceptible. If you look back to, there was a big malware outbreak called NotPetya, and it really hurt mail shipping really hard. And so you'll see things like that where there'll be some collateral kind of fallover and it'll cause some issues in the supply chain. And so that's another thing just to think about your supply chain disruptions and where you could maybe have alternate sources.
Yeah. And Kim, Randy brings up a really interesting point in that when he talked about ransomware gangs, the vast majority of attacks that come through nation states actually result in or trigger off ransomware kinds of events. And the ransomware gangs now, as a result of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, have started coming out openly and siding with wherever their allegiance may lie as like self-proclaimed cyber patriots, and they'll go after the perceived enemy of their own free will. So now we have the ransomware gangs jumping in to either attack, back attack nation states or to attack private entities that may show allegiance to the nation state that they don't align with. And that's going to make things even more complicated.
What do you guys think? Why do you think that they have not taken down Ukraine's communication and their internet infrastructure? Do you think it's just to continue to gather more information? What's your thought on that?
So I think there's really something to that. Even when you look at their traditional warfare, I think all of the traditional warfare people are kind of confused as to why Russia hasn't been more dominant in this war. And I'm curious if something similar is happening on the cyber front, where maybe they just don't want to give away all their capability. They don't think it's necessary right now. And so they're playing it a little closer to the vest. It is interesting just from a strategy perspective. There's this whole idea of, do I do my cyber attacks as kind of that initial fury to try to take down some of the infrastructure, or do I save it and do it later? And right now, all we're really seeing is like what Pat's talking about, which is there's these sort of private people that are hacking each other based on their allegiances. And we're not really seeing, we're seeing more that's called hacktivism. We're seeing more of the hacktivism than we are seeing true nation state attacks. And I'm not too, trying to guess what Russia's doing is very difficult right now. But yeah, I know they probably have a lot more capability than what they're showing.
Well, you're also fighting the thought of trying to rationalize what may be irrational behavior, and so we're not really sure whether is it they're not taking down the infrastructure because they're, as Randy says, still gathering intelligence or keeping it close to the vest. Is it that is there any concern that the major players in cyber, the other nation states, US, UK, EU, and so on and so forth, would rush to the aid, and that might be somewhat overwhelming, and so they're trying not to tip over that can yet. There's a bunch of different possibilities, but I think in the end, we're all trying to second guess, and all the heavy duty analysts are trying to second guess what's the rationalization that's coming from the irrational behavior of an invasion anyway.
And last week, right when it happened, I think Saturday, I was watching, some news channel. They all have different views, but it was some brigadier general or something. He said that there was an attack that happened, but it hasn't been revealed. That was almost a week ago. So I haven't heard, who knows what's happening behind, the CIA and all that. What have you guys heard as far as what's happening?
I think the biggest thing I've seen, again, it's been kind of on the private side a bit, but there's a Conti ransomware, CONTI, that was taken down, I want to say a couple of days ago. And that was probably the biggest thing. And really, this seems more like downfall of kind of the ransomware gangs fighting amongst each other right now, which is very interesting. I think one thing that's also interesting is following kind of like the InfoSec Twitter folks out there, you see lots of talk about wanting to kind of do those like evangelism things and try to hack Russia. And I'm sure the same thing's happening on the Russia side, trying to hack some of our infrastructure as well. And there's some reports, kind of like the one you just mentioned, where nothing verified yet, but there's, it seems like there's reports of kind of some pretty significant victories on that side. And it'll be interesting to see once we have a chance to decompress, a couple of months down the road, how much of this was fact versus fiction.
Real quick before I go over to Pat, I have a couple of comments and from some of our listeners. Trent Bunnell, he's the information security officer over at SAIC. He said, nation state, and thanks for joining us, Trent. He said, nation state attacks are scary, but after current events, I'm scared of the idea of crowdsource attacks, looking at Russia, rumors of attacks on electric vehicles, spy satellites, banking, and so on from the people.
Yeah, well, clearly what we've seen has not indicated any hesitation on the part of Russia with respect to any harm that might be done to civilians or collateral damage, so to speak. So and what we're seeing play out is this idea too that it's much easier to conduct cyber campaigns, especially given the recent times we've gone through with pandemic, than it is to conduct traditional espionage. The techniques are easier to invest in. Techniques for the cyber espionage, they're cheaper and you have greater plausible deniability. So that's all coming together to make that the choice of attack from these kinds of nation states.
Well, I'm going to come back to John's question in a minute, but I just wanted to jump over to Alicia Johnson. She said, I agree with Trent. And what if China and Russia team up to hack us? So many things to be truly concerned about. Is this a time, though, that we're in a big place of misinformation and disinformation? It just, what's your thought on that?
I think so. I think it's hard to really know what is fact versus somebody just kind of being a bit. And so, I mean, what's interesting about kind of the internet technology in general is it does give individuals a lot of power to act. And so, honestly, I was thinking about this the other day and really thinking, I think the nation states actually have a lot to be concerned about, especially if you're a Russia or a China and you're alienating yourself from the world, because there's a lot of really smart people in this world that are going to be targeting you. And so, I think that might be part of the lesson here is they're trying not to enrage people too much, to kind of get that, hacker community acting against them. Because it's really interesting. I think it's the first time in a conflict, especially when you talk about cyber war type conflict, where really anyone can get involved and decide to start attacking another nation if they want to.
Yeah. Well, I'll harken back real quickly to sound bites of recent years in the U.S. and now we hear those picked up in Russia. The Russian Parliament just I heard today pass laws that prohibit fake news, and yeah, I did air quotes even though you didn't see them. Fake news being broadcast by any of the journalists in Russia. And it comes with up to like a 15-year penalty, a prison penalty potentially, if you're caught publishing news that the Russian government believes to be fake or doesn't agree with. It still remains to be seen if they're going to apply that standard to foreign journalists also. But there's another whole aspect to what's going on in the world.
Well, John Modlin, he's the senior systems engineer over at ProFitTap. He said, do you know how the government planned for black holing international DDoS attacks, or are U.S. companies left to their own resources to handle?
Randy, I don't know what you think. I don't know that we have specific governmental action going after trying to black hole DDoS attacks. I think we are kind of left to our own devices in some way. So I don't think I've seen anything along that line. Have you, Randy?
No. As a matter of fact, I mean, this is something I've talked about a lot. How the FBI has a program that kind of does this public-private partnership, and they're good for information sharing, but really when it comes to things like, especially like a denial of service, and if you think about just cutting entire countries off the internet, there really isn't a big mechanism for that within the government trying to control it. And so you are kind of left to your own devices, so go out and get those DDoS prevention services. If you don't have them, you might want to really think about how you would get it in place if you needed to.
Right.
Trent said, does that not make all wars from here on out a world war? Before a country declares war, will they have to get the world's buy-in?
Are we? We're essentially equating a world war to global economy nowadays. It's just the same thing.
And what are your thoughts as far as this whole fifth article, and if there is a big cyber attack, what's your thoughts with NATO, and is that considered a Article 5 attack?
You know what is really interesting about that is you think about that, and you think about, especially with like Putin threatening the nuclear war, and trying to do attribution is very difficult. And so, especially what if essentially you have this like hacktivist group, and they're based in multiple different countries, and they're coming after you. Maybe it's not they're not affiliated with the government at all. Do you still consider that an act of war when it's a private citizen group essentially doing an act of war? I mean, in traditional warfare, we don't all have missiles to fire off. But in the cyberspace, I mean, all it requires is knowledge and a keyboard. And so that's a very interesting thing. And I think that's what makes us all nervous, is how is the world going to react if there is a significant victory? If somebody takes the entire power grid of Russia offline, how do they react to that?
Well, and we have to be careful though that we're not, when we say NATO, that we don't just automatically assume world. because NATO is a specific group of countries of which Ukraine was looking to gain membership into. So, I don't know that imposing rules and verdicts of one organization that others don't belong to necessarily plays that heavily into the decisions that those others make. So, are non-members of NATO, do they really care that NATO says it was a violation?
So going back to Trent's question, did we actually answer that before a country declares war? Will they have to get the world's buy-in?
I to answer it directly, I mean, I think yes. I think if we're talking America, even if you look at like Iraq and Afghanistan as far as wars, I mean, we were always trying to get that coalition of the willing going. And I think what you're seeing here with Putin is the world completely turned against him because they didn't think he had a basis for doing what he's doing. So I think even outside of the realm of the cyber world, I think if you're going to go to war with another country, you need to have a really good reason for doing that.
And
Pat?
taking over land, at least seemingly, has not been a reason nowadays. But Putin has certainly shown us that retaking countries that he believed to be part of the USSR is perfectly within the realm of reason.
So tell me, with the CISO world, and I know you both are very connected to, the CISOs all over, North America or probably further. What is keeping you guys up at night, and what's your biggest fears at this point in time?
So if you're a global organization, I think you have a little bit different look. You're still going to look for places where you might see gaps in access in those countries, Russia, Ukraine, et cetera. I think what's been interesting to me is watching a lot of the companies that are more, say, U.S. centric. They don't necessarily do business overseas. So, they're scrubbing from the OFAC list and from, the 249 odd country domains that are out there. They're going out there and basically dumping, 180, 190 blocking countries because, let's say they're a local bank. They don't do business, in Germany or France or wherever. And so they don't have a need to allow that to happen, regardless of whether it's considered an OFAC country or not. And that's fascinating to me that they're going to hunker down to that degree.
Randy, what's your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are. Pat and I are in a lot of chat groups where we talk about, kind of what we're seeing and what's going on. So far, it seems like a lot of the same, just a little bit increased in volume, we're all seeing sort of more phishing attacks, that sort of thing going on. But I think the thing that really keeps me up at night in this situation is just that unknown. What's the thing that I don't know? And what's the thing that's going to surprise us? Because, when we talk about, somebody not unleashing all of their capability, but when they do, is that going to be a capability that something we've never seen before and we're completely unprepared for? That's the thing that really concerns me, because we have a lot of great technologies out there to solve a lot of problems. But the thing that really concerns me is just somebody coming up with a completely new kind of attack vector.
Well, and especially given the loiter time of attackers, in a system doing reconnaissance before they ever make anything happen. So there's no telling, in many cases, what you might have in your environment that could come back to haunt you downstream when stuff really hits the fan.
And Pat, I know CBRE is huge. I don't know how huge. How big are you guys?
About 110,000 employees, and the reported revenue was about 28 billion last year.
So do you cover global? Are you?
Yeah, we have about 450-ish offices in 144 countries. So
okay, so what's keeping you up every night? There's got to be a lot. You're in a pretty hard pressed.
It is. It's twofold though, because you have your own environment, which if you do all the things like Randy mentioned in the beginning, you do good hygiene, you pay attention to the basics, you don't chase the shiny objects, all those good cliches that we talk about all the time, that certainly puts you in a very good position. You have to ramp up your view of data that may be trafficking in or out of those countries that are in question, or the people that are from those countries in question, just to make sure that you don't miss something, you don't see anomalous behavior. Other than that, though, there's a lot of time spent responding to clients, to customers, because all the customers have the same questions of us as a third party. And so we have to answer it twice. We have to answer it for ourselves, and then we have to create response for the client too. And that's a lot of clients to deal with.
So being the global head of cyber governance, how big is your security team across the world?
We have 85 to 100 people in the team, which is really kind of small for the size of the organization that we are. But we do everything we can to be efficient and effective.
And then, Randy, what are you doing right now? And can you give us some insight? I usually start the show and kind of talk about what you guys are doing on a daily basis, but I just dove in. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what Real-Time Resolutions is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're a smaller organization. We're 450 people. We're in 3 countries, not 144. So I definitely have a little bit easier of a task. Just to do those ratios, I have 3 people that work for me. So I've got 4 people kind of working on that. And luckily I have a really good IT team that's kind of bought on to the security message and helps me out a ton as well. But yeah, I would say our biggest thing, we have definitely seen some novel kind of phishing attempts come in. And so really leaning on the partners that we work with from a security perspective and saying, hey, can you dig into this? Can you tell us what you think is going on here? And getting some expertise from them to kind of try to prepare for those unknowns that are out there. And then also, like Pat kind of mentioned, CISA put out notification to most financial institutions and probably a lot of other folks. And that definitely spurred a lot of questions on have you resolved all of these things that are on the CISA list, which are those sort of basic hygiene things. And so a lot of kind of just having like good templated answers for that. But then also checking with our vendors and kind of thinking about our supply chain resiliency as well.
Yeah. And there's the key, because, the great equalizer for every big company is the fact that we all have vendors that may be a smaller company. And that's the great equalizer across the board. So if you don't have visibility into your supply chain and some way to manage that, then it doesn't matter how big a staff you have or how many controls you put in place.
So going back to the whole theme of the show is, are we ready for these attacks that are unknown? Of course, we want to say we're ready, but where are some of the vulnerabilities, not even here in the United States, across the world, that we should be fearful of?
So, yeah, I would say the number one place where I'd be fearful is, Pat and I and yourself, Kim. I mean, all of us, we're kind of biased because we're in the cybersecurity world. And that means the companies we work with, the companies we're talking to, they're all at least somewhat aware of the information security problem. They should be out there trying to, do these sort of basic hygiene things. The thing where I think we're not prepared is, honestly, we're in the minority. There's a ton of companies there that still don't think this problem's going to apply to them. And so if you do see a broader sort of cyber attack, I think you'll find that there's a lot of companies, and not just small companies, but there are probably some really big companies that might be important, that fall off. I think, out there could be some company that's making cardboard, and, they go down, and now there's a box shortage and we can't ship things around just because nobody can get cardboard boxes. Those are the sorts of things where I think we're going to find vulnerabilities, is that there's these smaller pieces that we really don't think about in our supply chains that could get affected because they're just not focused on the InfoSec problem at all.
Yeah, I heard that today. I'm trying to remember the exact context, but I think neon is something that an element or that it is produced for manufactured products, and most of it comes from Ukraine. And then there was some other aspect that was out of Russia the same way. So we see that trickle down throughout the entire supply chain when something like that goes on and creates a restriction of some sort. So I think, how do you prepare for those things that, you know, are so trickled down? We're so interweaved and we're so mixed together again that, you know, this is that whole idea, global economy and world war. There's no telling where it's going to come from. Where I think we have done a disservice in my mind over the years, and we've become better over in recent years, is that we've not spread that word, to Randy's point, so that it becomes ingrained in our culture and ingrained in just our personal lives as well, that cybersecurity is an important aspect of having the convenience of technology. And so every chance that we can take to make it more personal and make it more attractive personally to individuals, that's where we're going to get our biggest bang for the buck.
And how are we going to do that? What would your advice be to all of us that are privy to all this information, because we are in this industry, you know? But it's interesting you talking about, you know, if a box company gets attacked, I mean, that's going to be a huge, you know, from a company that all we do is ship all the time, all over the country, as you guys do too. You know, what a disaster that would be. And all of a sudden, boxes that we see all over the place, you know, they become short. I know this is kind of a side note. One of the things since COVID, it's harder to find Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand that I like. And it's really bothering me, you know, that I might not be able to get Sauvignon Blanc. And that's, you know, that's just an example, like boxes, you
I think
know.
great example. No, I think through this pandemic, right, we've all seen, I mean, look at what's going on with the auto industry and the chip shortage. And it just kind of shows, you know, it's like, oh my God, there's this one company, you know, that's producing all these chips, and, you know, they just fell behind, you know, because of COVID, and then unexpected kind of hard to model demand, essentially. And so you see how easy it is to disrupt that supply chain. And I mean, it's an incredibly complicated problem. And I think the best thing we can do, honestly, is just communicate with other people. You know, it's one thing I think about why this isn't more widely known. If you think about the InfoSec community in general, or technology in general, we're typically introverted type people, and maybe we don't talk as much as we should. But yeah, when you're, you know, out socializing and, you know, somebody asks you what you do, you know, definitely make them interested in it. You know, I just had that conversation with somebody who was you know, an HR person, you know, and he was like, oh, so that's like Okta. That's what InfoSec is, you know, and I try to take the time to kind of educate them on, actually, there's a lot more to InfoSec than that. You know, this is why we're always on you about installing your patches, about changing your passwords, you know, why you have that multi-factor on your device now. I mean, I think that's really what we can do, is try to get people to understand that it's more than just something the government makes you do to be compliant, that there's a real impact in the real world if you don't do these things, because yeah, you can start interrupting the supply chain.
Well, and Randy's heard me preach this line before too, is we need to, as technologists and cybersecurity folks, to accept the fact that move to the dark side and become salespeople and start to use some of the tips and techniques from a sales position. When we talk to our friends that are non-technical or non-cyber, you know, we shouldn't be talking in our own language. We should be telling stories. We should be using analogies. We should be making it palatable to you know, the average person, and not make it so mystical that they think it's some black box or voodoo. And that's how we start to gain that kind of interest and trust.
Yeah, usually when someone asks me what I do and I tell them I put on cybersecurity conferences, they're always just like, "Oh, you must be really busy." You know, that's just because that's what they hear. They may not real or that sounds really, you know, complicated, and Alan Alford, he was on the show, and I was talking to him about what IoT devices did you see come out at Christmas? What were, did you see any that were scary? And he talked about that picture frame, and my kids had actually got one, and I didn't really take it. I was like, and I tried to tell my kids, hey, one of my experts on the show said that's kind of a dangerous device. And they're like, well, I don't know how it's dangerous. And then all of a sudden random pictures started. I unplugged it. I don't use it anymore. It was a little creepy how these pictures started coming out there. But again, it's hard sometimes. You guys are the experts, but it is hard sometimes to get into the detailed fact of, how it just goes over people's heads. So you're right that you have to kind of back up a little bit and try to explain it a little better.
Well, it's kind of an inverted psychology too, in some ways, because we also in cyber, it's one of the few times where the victim of a crime will be further victimized by, regulations like GDPR and such like that. Look at the big to do about like the baby cameras, the camera.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, is it really, or Ring was a good example too, or Zoom is a perfect example. Is it really that vendor's responsibility if they give us the functions in the applications to secure ourselves? Shouldn't we take the time to learn it? Now, you can make the argument that they should default it to most secure. Okay, I'll buy that. But beyond that, we need to take responsibility, and we don't have a culture of taking responsibility for cyber issues at this point, not at the individual level. And that's something that'll have to change over time.
Trent has another question, and definitely don't be sorry, Trent, for commenting. We welcome our listeners to chime in because we like your feedback as well. He said, but could you give me a comment on hiring veterans for cybersecurity? He's very big into veterans, being a veteran, and he supports that community a lot. How do they fit into this profession? Last, do you look to the veterans to help your organizations, and how have they be value additive, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the veteran community is huge. I think just because of that background, right? You've got that kind of defensive mindset. But also, especially, I have a friend, actually I have two friends who are, one who exited the government service, retired after about 3 years ago, and another one who's going through the process right now. One huge thing, as kind of Pat talks about GDPR and government regulation, I think one thing, if you've been in government service, you have a really good ability to translate those compliance requirements into real world action. And I think that's huge, right? And that is above and beyond that kind of natural defense mindset that you probably have. You probably have that kind of personality that you like to protect things, that you want to go out and make things more secure, which means you kind of already have this aptitude or appetite as well to go out and work in the security field. So that's huge. We have a bunch of people who kind of want to get into InfoSec just because they're kind of in the technology field. They think it's interesting. Maybe they want a bigger paycheck, but it might not be the best direction for them to go in. When I look at the veteran community, I see a lot of people who just already have that appetite to get into this and want to get into it. And so, yeah, anyone out there who's listening, if you need help, it sounds like you can reach out to Trent, you can reach out to myself. Trent, definitely thank you for all the questions, and same for Alicia and John.
Yeah. And for me, being a veteran also, I know Kim was a veteran. So I can't say enough about how appreciative I am of the people that have served like that. But when it comes down to all other things being equal, certainly that veteran status is going to play very heavily with me, not just because of personal experience, but because it does show a certain level of attitude and ability to work in a system and work in a team. I think the biggest one I deal with veterans is this idea of they generally are so mission oriented that oftentimes mission takes precedent over everything. And that's the good news. The bad news is mission takes precedent over everything. Therefore, you have to make sure you help them balance out that lifestyle a little bit. But I think they are well suited to the cyber profession, and I think that they add a lot because they're also trained to think outside the box to get the mission done, and that's huge value to us.
You know, not only is Trent an information security officer, he does a lot of volunteer work for the veterans. I've had him on my show. I've had him at one of our conferences before. He's going to sit on a panel in Denver. But kudos to him, because he's out there helping the veterans that are trying to find jobs and helping, veterans that are struggling from war. So good job on everything that you're doing, Trent. I mean, we need more people like you. John said, what do you think of anonymous?
Oh,
Go ahead, Freddie.
I think this is where it comes right back to attribution. One of my friends on Twitter posted something this morning, and somebody else kind of retweeted it and was like, look, anonymous in action. And so he was joking, oh, apparently I'm part of Anonymous now. And so, I mean, anonymous is so interesting because it is exactly that, right? It is anonymous and they are everywhere. And that's kind of what I think about. We had that question about, everyone kind of getting involved and kind of having that little bit of mob mentality in this. And it's interesting because that mob can be anywhere in the world. And so I feel like that's kind of what anonymous is it is a global force. And kind of anyone can jump in and kind of poke that button. But it also makes it very difficult to try to attribute things back and say, oh, hey, anonymous is really this static group of individuals, because I don't think that is the case.
Oh, no, it's the quintessential crowdsource hacktivist group. They are unknown, and but the interesting thing to me is that although you can't attribute it to individuals in the group necessarily, the group is pretty open about coming out and taking credit for things that they've done.
And Kyle Cravens, hey, he's preaching to the choir. He said, agreed. Our veterans are some of the finest. No reason for them not to be on the front line here too. I feel like there's such a huge, I would love to know the statistics of how many veterans are actually, in the cybersecurity industry. And if they're not veterans, they're certainly from the DOD, just for working for the military. Do you guys have any idea of that? Because it seems like there's a ton.
I don't have any data on it. But yet, one thing I want to think about, and something Pat said, is that work-life balance with veterans, because they are so mission focused. And I've definitely had that problem, right? Where I'm trying to push them to take PTO, to, not work those long hours, because I think if anyone who works with veterans, or really if you work with anyone who's really working really hard in this profession, the answer is the work never stops. There is always something new coming up, and I think there's tons that talks about that, about CISO burnout. And a huge part of that is just, you've got to make that work-life balance. And I think if you do have veterans you work for and you see them kind of pushing too hard, try to help them put those boundaries in there, because one thing that makes them so fantastic is they are very mission oriented, and just trying to get that balance back in is huge.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I worked for the military police. I worked, in just a lot of different jobs, which is kind of nice, because when I went in the military, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I went in and enlisted, and it definitely put that work ethic into me. So I can work 24/7. I don't mind working the weekends, but I definitely need my staff to take the time off on the weekend and refuel. Shut your laptop. Not everyone can work 24/7, and I'm sure you guys are working 24/7 because you have to.
Well, and there's I can't recall the name, nor would I necessarily plug it just openly, but there's a company out there that is working with veterans specifically. And what they do is they are locating centers of excellence near military installations, so that they can create an opportunity for those coming out of the military to jump into effectively like a training internship program in cyber, and then it be nearby where their existing family life is, so that they don't have to completely pick up and upheave their family. And then they're using those as they graduate from this training program. They're calling it actually a boot camp. And they're using those folks to contract out on projects for clients. And that's where they drive the revenue to be able to create the programs. Really interesting model, but it exists out there.
Well, we kind of got a little off topic, which is completely fine. But, thank God for our active duty military, because they're out there now and they're part of this everything. We don't know what's going to evolve into our military and how involved they're going to be with this crisis and this new war that we're seeing. But where, as far as when I was in the military, cybersecurity didn't exist. The word wasn't even there. So what portion of the military, is protecting what's going on with these future hacks, and where do you think, what is their responsibility? Where does their responsibility lie in defending us on a cyber level?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career in defense contracting. And that was back in 2004, 2005. And I know, back then information security was really not a topic at all. And the things we were doing, it was not great, and so I think things have gotten a lot better. I do have friends who work in the field now. And I think things are getting a lot better. I think one thing to kind of like give to all of those kind of people in the defense industry right now is just, thinking about kind of like those operational security things and not wanting to overshare, because there's probably a real temptation to do that, especially up the inside scoop thing. And you don't. We'll learn later down the road. It'll be okay. But yeah, I think the main thing is just make sure we can maintain our defensive capabilities, because I think that's the hugest thing. We have a very capable defense apparatus here, but it does kind of require everyone kind of doing their job and being able to be flexible with the chaos that might come.
Yeah, well, and yes, I was kind of the same way, Kim, although much longer ago than you. They had no such thing as IT or cyber. In fact, when I was in the military, the back office environment was run on a Wang VS system. So that tells you how long ago that's been. But now we have U.S. Cyber Command, which is something that is a huge player in the cyber world, of course, and they're divvied up into the Army cyber and fleet cyber and Air Force cyber, Marine cyber, et cetera, but run by a central organization. And they have that mission specific to be involved in and defend the DoD infrastructure, and then the support to combatant commanders and so forth. So it's a huge part of their just operational strategies for the military as a whole.
So we have about 7 minutes left before the show closes. So I want to make sure we spend these last 7 minutes just really covering, going back to what Alicia talked about earlier. There's some fear out there. Again, going back to what advice just on a daily basis, how to not live in fear, and what is your advice to all the InfoSec people out there, how we can make a difference from today forward.
Yeah, I'll say the same thing I always say, and Randy echoed this early on, is stop chasing the next new shiny object, and focus on the things that really matter, understanding your assets, understanding your hardware, software, data assets, securing those. Data protection is so important. Identity and access management, backup and recovery programs. Your basics are going to get you so far along the path to protection that then you can focus on that incremental difference to get further along.
And yeah, Randy. Yep.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that, kind of scared a friend yesterday because we were talking about nuclear war, and it's there's a real possibility of it. And the nice thing about it is that the decision will probably be made during the daytime in Russia while we're all sleeping. So if the worst does happen, none of us will probably know that it happens, which is a terrifying thing for me to tell you. But the real thing there is try to enjoy yourself. Don't get caught up in the fear and the stress. Go find something you enjoy doing and go do that. Kind of do those basics. Make sure you're maintaining that good hygiene. But try to enjoy yourself as well, and don't get overstressed and burn out in this.
Yeah. With the EMP though, if nukes do go off, cyber's probably not going to be a problem anymore with no technology left. So.
Well, that's kind of a dreary, dreary thought. But so say we have this, well, hold on. It looks like we got another comment. And it's from our friend Trent. He just said mastery of industry standards, which is exactly what you guys have been saying. But what about the box guy, the IT director, and working at the box company? You guys all have each other, or you have a CISO community that you can bounce ideas off of. What would your advice be to that one-man IT director that is playing all roles? Where does he keep himself informed and educated?
Go to CISA.gov, CISA.gov, and follow the list of what they have out there. They do have a list. I think it's about 159 kind of actively being exploited patches that you should apply. So yeah, if you're still running Adobe Flash, turn it off. If you haven't patched your Windows stuff in ages, patch it. If you can't patch it because it's some sort of important system, make sure you have a firewall and you're blocking all ingress and egress traffic to that device.
Yeah, CISA is a great resource. You have the National Vulnerability Database, great resource. When you start talking about looking internally, because we tend to hyper focus on external attacks and exploits, but we do have the possibility of unintentional or intentional insider risk. And in that case, you have resources like Carnegie Mellon's SEI is out there, and they have all sorts of good resources. So there's plenty of resources out there for us.
And then what about, I know there's lots of, if people don't have time to do the reading and they can multitask, there's lots of great podcasts out there. Besides mine, what are some of the informative ones that you would recommend listeners to go to stay informed?
Well, Randy, I mean, you might have different, but I'm going to stick with the folks that I'm most close to. And so, the CISO series with David Spark, and Cyber Ranch with Alan Alford. And I love listening to Darknet Diaries. And those are, there's James Azar has one that's out of Atlanta that's really good. Those are the primary ones that I look towards.
Yeah, I would ditto that. All those people have been guests, and I listen to those. We're down to about 2 minutes. Is there anything, Randy, any ones you want to add to that?
The only one I would plug is a good friend of ours who's a really good kind of hacker out there in this world, is Chris Roberts, and he's got a new one called Dr. Dark Web that is coming out.
Yeah, and Chris Roberts is actually going to be our keynote speaker, and he's been on the show before, but he'll be our keynote speaker in Denver in May. So love meeting all of you guys, because I'm so lucky in this job to meet people like you guys that are, making the pathway for all the, attacks and all the informative information out there. Thank you so much, Randy Potts, CISO of Real Time Resolutions, and Pat Benoit. Did I mess that up? Pat Benoit. Benoit. I knew I wasn't looking at my notes. Global head of cyber governments over at CBRE. Thank you guys for joining us so much today. I knew that hour would go fast. I have Matthew Runquist. He's the CISO over at Eclipse. He's going to be on my show next week. We're going to continue this talk of nation state attackers. That's one of his favorite subjects. So thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of And Security for All. Everyone enjoy your weekend. Stay safe, stay secure, and like Pat and Randy said, try to have some fun and enjoy your time. Thanks everyone.